set that right there. So thank you, Sam. And I'd like to invite the previous speakers to come on up so we can have a short conversation.
Interesting.
So thank you all for your interesting talks. It was a really interesting spread of different areas that you all are kind of involving robotics in. I mentioned earlier about one of our 10 breakthrough technologies this year is robot dexterity. And I was curious if each of you could talk a little bit about how you might see these changes in robot dexterity affecting each of your areas that you're working in. I know you're working more with, say, software, but do you see that making any influences for you?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we see is, especially in the space of retail, there being a lot of robots doing different things within the environment in the future, potentially restocking the shelves, potentially cleaning the aisles, potentially moving obstacles around. And you saw that a little bit with some of the videos that I showed.
Sure.
So I think that the missing gap between a lot of what we're seeing in machines that can do cool stuff and being able to actually do that in a practical and human environment is the perception piece. Mm-hmm. But we're increasingly decreasing the gap that exists right now.
Got it. What about you, Jeremy?
It's not something that affects the products that we're currently working on, but we've done a couple of projects with the space agency again, and the two areas that are important are precise servoing. So you want to bring a tool to a certain location, and then the ability to change the tool to fit the application. So typically these space robots have something we literally call a holster, and the robot will go and connect to the tool that's appropriate. And it might be a tool that's drilling a hole, very fine hole in the ground. You don't want the robot to move because it'll snap off the drill bit. And if you're doing a sample, you want to make sure the robot's sampling the exact spot. So the servoing was the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
My turn?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the first thing is that dexterity is the one thing that is very, very difficult to recover in patients. So almost all of the work that's been done so far has been on what they call gross motor behavior, things like this kind of movement. And of course that's valuable. I think if we understand dexterity a bit better, we may be in a better position to develop machines to help people recover dexterity. And I think that's coming. It's not here yet.
Yeah, so I think dexterity has a lot of potential to sort of complement what social robots are already good at. We focus in these tutoring tasks mostly on things like language skills, STEM skills, because of limitations in dexterity, but it's not hard to imagine that if you had a social robot that was also highly dexterous, you could extend that tutoring framework to things like physical tasks, more therapeutic things, job retraining, different skills, that kind of stuff.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of you talked about how you're working to try to make the robots work better with humans. I was wondering, are there any things we as humans can do to be better coworkers for robots? Anyone can take this, whoever wants to.
Well, I have a unique story of robots actually in a grocery store. And so there's 24-hour stores where our robots were deployed in. So we would see the full gamut of people interacting with those robots. We would have the robot doing its thing. We'd also have at 11 p.m. people who are drunk coming in and hitting the robot on the head or pushing the robot over. We had people with little kids running up to the robot, and I think it was mentioned, and naturally hugging it as well. My biggest surprise was that during the day, most people didn't really care that there was this machine that was driving down the aisles, and so long as it didn't get in their way, they sort of naturally thought that the robot in their environment was a thing that had been there for some time. So that was a big surprise for me.
Anything else from any of you?
I think it's going to happen naturally. We're starting to see now social interfaces rolling out on a lot of devices. So I'd say it's, sort of a bit of a debate whether something like an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home qualifies as a robot, but it's certainly a social interface to an artificial intelligence device. And it's being rolled out, and people are buying them and dealing with them every single day at a scale that's frankly unprecedented. So I do think that having a social interface, and this is sort of the thesis that underlies our work in social robotics, having a natural social interface where people can come to these devices and deal with them in ways that they sort of already expect or have at least some frame of reference for dealing with this kind of technology, that's going to just get better and more widespread as we go forward.
Sure.
So I'd like to add, I think another thing that we can do, and this really is a task for the robot designers and programmers, is The key to human movement is that the main principle underlying our behavior is that it's predictable. And one of the things that I think will help humans work better with robots and robots work better with people is if the robots and the humans have similar architecture of movement. So the limitations of human movement should be reflected in the way we design the robots. That way, when humans are doing things that are predictable to other humans, the robot can also predict what the human's doing. I think that will improve collaboration.
There actually is an example where human behavior has been changed worldwide. Cell phones with little keyboards that are QWERTY keyboards. I just lost my mic. People are used to typing like this, but the QWERTY keyboard has turned us from finger typers to thumb typers. So we've adapted to the phone's limitation rather than the phone adapting.
Interesting. Now, obviously, we're in the Caribbean, so I was curious to know, you mentioned a lot of different places where robots are being applied. Are there any places that you think specifically in this region you see them being applied first, or some of the applications that'll be coming in the next few years? I'll go, yeah.
So perhaps cultivation of coffee would be an application for robots, because you can use them not only to go up and down the lines of the plants, perhaps do soil testing and create a database of how healthy the soil is and maybe optimize the use of the fertilizers that are used. But the robot could also take pictures. So the fruit on the coffee plant is growing. And I don't know how important that is in the coffee business, but in the wine business that we're looking at, being able to estimate what your yield is really important, because if you don't meet your yield for your suppliers, you get penalized financially. And if you overproduce, then you have to sell your wine at a discount. So I think there's going to be a lot of applications for using team robots combined with machine learning and AI.
Sure. And now, whenever we talk about robots, there's always the hyperbolic headlines of robots are taking our jobs. But a lot of this is talking about humans working alongside robots. We have a panel tomorrow that's focused on the future of work, but I was curious, in your experience, have you seen people being displaced with some of these technologies, or is it more a collaboration that's coming into place?
I can relate my limited experience in trying to get therapeutic robots into the clinical environment. And two things have happened. One is that we've been doing this for some time, and the initial response we got was somewhat, I hesitate to say hostile, but it was certainly dismissive. But now what we've seen happening, particularly in the last 5 years or more, is that particularly the younger generation of physiotherapists and physiatrists, they're much more familiar with the technology, and they say, oh, it's obvious that you should use robots in a clinical environment. So in part, the age of the practitioner makes a difference. The other thing that's really important is that this is not a machine to replace a human. It's a machine to give a human the ability to do things that they can't otherwise do. So with the robotic technology, you amplify the skill set of a human. And the analogy that we've drawn is that, I don't know if you've seen a chess grandmaster who's able to play more than one game of chess at a time. Well, that's really great. I'm thinking that we should have the physiatrist acting as the grandmaster therapist with the robots doing a specific individual interaction. So I think that's one of the ways where I don't think we'll be replacing therapists, but we'll be changing the way they work.
I actually thought from your demographics that the problem is going to be a shortage of therapists, and how do you deal with that with an aging population?
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that and say that's exactly the same approach that we've taken to teachers when we bring these robots to school, is that, you know, we go there and these teachers say, oh, thank goodness, you know, I wish I had the time to have these one-on-one sessions where I'm teaching these kids language. You know, we know that one-on-one tutoring, it's been shown over and over again, one-on-one tutoring is the most effective form of educational instruction. And yet we simply don't have the teachers, you know, we don't have the resources to provide that level of personalized pedagogy to all of these students. So if robots can provide, you know, maybe an additional practice or even some, you know, extra instruction outside of normal classroom times because they're always available or they're, you know, there when teachers can't be, I think that's going to be something where it's this synergistic relationship. It's not meant to replace your teacher, but it is meant to supplement what they give you in the classroom.
But can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go
Sorry.
for it.
There is a sobering point, though. In India last year, autonomous vehicles were made illegal. And the main concern for the Indian government was that all these vehicles are going to displace the taxi drivers. But what they didn't understand was if you put an autonomous vehicle in an Indian street, a regular thoroughfare, it's probably never going to move. Because all the people are going to be walking around it, and the robot will say, I don't want to hurt anyone.
Got it. Joe,
Yeah,
something?
I don't want to overlook the reality that like massive amounts of jobs are going to be displaced. And although I have optimism about human creativity and the opportunity for new jobs that we're not even thinking of, and I'm sure you'll talk more about that tomorrow. There's already been a massive displacement throughout the Midwest of the U.S., right? And the assembly jobs that once existed probably aren't going to exist in the future. So I think that it is important for us to look for a solution, for practical ways to find solutions for how to retrain people or how to support people in finding new occupations, and also potentially rethinking the way that global economies work as well. But probably a different talk.
Sure. And now all of you are in very different areas and industries, even though you're all working in robotics. I was curious, how big do you think the market size for your products really is? Is this something that's expanding pretty exponentially? We can start with you, Jonas.
So the opportunities within AI and robotics itself.
And specifically with your, scanning things, supermarkets, like the areas that you're focused
Yeah,
in.
so what we're seeing is that really these grocery store floor is becoming the local distribution center. So there's a reason why Amazon bought Whole Foods, right? It's that there's Whole Foods throughout the entire U.S. and they're 15 minutes away from any urban resident, and people are continuously migrating to urban areas. So now you have the ability to be able to do local delivery within a very short amount of time, and that'll only continue to grow, right? So we see a future where robots are driving down store floors, doing a number of different things, but it may not even be a future where humans are walking down those same store floors at the same rate. It might be mostly robots that are actually picking up products from shelves, packing them, and it being, and landing on your doorstep the next day.
Though you don't see a big application for pizza delivery robots, it sounds like, though.
Maybe in 10 years,
Okay.
and it'll be drones by then.
Okay. All right, Jeremy, what about you?
We had a separate private company do a research study on the perimeter security market, and we estimate that it's going to be at least $8 billion in the next 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Neville?
So I can't give you dollar numbers, but I can tell you about the incidence. So there are presently over 6 million stroke survivors in the United States. There is approximately 900,000 new stroke survivors every year. We have a similar rate in Europe and a greater rate in some of the Asian countries. So the population requiring treatment is large and it's growing. And the number of therapists available is small and shrinking. So I think that the prospects of market growth are quite good.
Social robots, as I mentioned, are still very much a research project. And as Jonas mentioned, there were a few social robot companies or companies that sort of emphasize that social aspect of the human-robot collaboration. Those have struggled to find a market, but I do think that over the coming decades, as the economics of robotic production changes and we find that these social robots can provide more value, I do think that the market is large and potentially even unlimited. So much of the economic activity that we do is backed by social relationships and social interaction. Services, all of that stuff.
And, I think we have time for one more question, so I'll just finish off with, we have a lot of, business leaders and stuff here today that might be looking at this and seeing maybe a potential application in their own business for these intelligent machines. What advice would you have for managers that are looking at...
Thing to get to grips with, and academics are not the best of people who are doing that.
As an academic, I'm going to provide a slightly cynical take, and that is there's a lot of hype out there. Make sure you see a demo, make sure you're very clear about what this technology can and can't do, where it works, where it fails, how flexible is it.
Sure.
And an optimistic version of that is to be realistic in terms of how long it's going to take to get to wherever you want to go. even if you do see a demo,
Yeah.
demos can be canned. So, know that you're going to have to work as a partner with whoever your provider is, but ultimately, I think it's an optimistic future.
Anything else from you, Jeremy? Or-
Thank you.
All right. Well, will you join me in giving a round of applause to this great panel? Now, I'd like to invite all of you to enjoy lunch in the next room and time to network with fellow attendees and these distinguished speakers. So thank you once again. Also, just a slight programming note, I want to inform you that the Future of Money track will now be moved up to the first half of the afternoon, and Reinventing Medicine track will begin at 3:45. So thank you very much.